So we are excited today to have our guest with us, Dr. Deborah Baldwin. So welcome.
Thank you.
Hello.
To our adventures in history today.
So we always ask our guests to tell us a little bit about themselves first.
Well, I guess the thing that you need to know probably more than anything is that I'm the staff writer and historian for Lighthouse Digest magazine. We're published out of Maine in this 26th year of publication currently. And we focus on keeper research pretty much. We focus on preserving lighthouses and archiving history and saving it for future generations. And the focus of our magazine is pretty much to honor the heritage of lighthouse keepers and for the service and the sacrifice that they gave. So we have many different ways that we do that.
But you're not in Maine.
I am not in Maine. I live in Idaho. A little drum beat there. Yes.
That's right.
Yes, but we do have our claim to fame in Idaho is Lake Pend has a secret submarine base where they do sonar testing.
No longer a secret. You
I
heard it
was
here
gonna
first.
say, you blew that.
You heard it here first.
Now everybody knows. Tick, 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 tick. Breaking news. Tick, 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 tick.
Actually, if you Google it, you come up with some very interesting photos that somebody with the whole history. It's really kind of funny. But I did drive up there, and yes, you can look through the chain link fence and see submarines sitting in their lagoon. It has a really deep lake, and so it's just kind of a, an anachronism. It's just as much as me being in Idaho and doing lighthouse research.
That's amazing.
Wow.
So how long have you had a fascination with lighthouses, and what brought this on?
Not all that long. This is going on my fourth year. I never had set foot in a lighthouse before 3 years ago when I traveled to Maine, and just on a fluke circumstance, I met our editor Tim Harrison. And we basically, in talking to him, I said I really wasn't all that interested in doing lighthouses or knowing that much more about them. But I said the thing was the people. I said I'm really interested in the history of the people who live there. And our eyes sort of connected on that. And he said, you're exactly right. And they needed some help with doing grave locations because we have a marker program where we put lighthouse service markers on keepers' graves.
Oh,
neat.
And he wasn't familiar with the genealogical databases like Ancestry.com and things like this, Find a Grave. And so I said I could help him with that. I said I'd be happy to help you locate the graves of lighthouse keepers, and that's kind of where it started and has grown ever since.
Wow. So before that, then, what was your historical research interests?
I teach history at Utah State University, mostly Islamic studies. I have a degree in Islamic studies from the University of Wales in Great Britain, and I've been overseas for almost on and off for 20 years. Living in Middle Eastern countries, and let me tell you, lighthouse research is a lot better than dealing with terrorist groups.
That might be a whole other show here.
There's nothing bad.
Kidding.
There's nothing bad about a lighthouse. Okay, there's nothing negative about a lighthouse. There's nothing, potentially hazardous. I mean, as far as political controversies or whatever that go on with lighthouses and. Destroying the whole world or whatever you want to call it. I mean, lighthouses are there for one purpose, and that's to save people's lives. And the histories and the thing that it's very calm and very peaceful is probably another reason why I like it, because it is very peaceful, in dealing with these isolated situations where the keepers and their families lived.
So before we get specific to Tillamook, just and I could probably Google this, but how many lighthouses, I guess, give me a ballpark figure if you do know it, how many still exist and how many are still staffed instead of just an automatic computerized thing?
Well, we have probably, I would say, between 700 and 800 lighthouses that are currently situated. Most of them are on the Great Lakes, which people wouldn't normally think that would be the case, but Great Lakes Michigan outnumbers lighthouses all the rest of the coast put together almost. I mean, they're an incredible amount of lighthouses there in Michigan. But the staffing of lighthouses, because of the automation process that took place when electricity became, very common, they actually started early on in the 20s, 30s. They started electrifying and putting in beacons and things in the stead of these the lamps that were operated by other, such as oil and other type of fuel. So there's only really one lighthouse that's currently staffed, and that's the one in Boston Harbor. And it currently is a Coast Guard station, and they still have keepers there. And that is our oldest lighthouse. It was 1716, so it's just celebrated its 300th anniversary a couple of years ago. But there's still currently what we consider to be lighthouse keepers at Boston Harbor Light.
Wow, that disappoints me. I thought there'd still be like a dozen or so. And Oh, so it is.
There's probably Santa Claus hiding them all.
Santa Claus hiding somewhere.
Probably,
Well,
yeah.
there's the lighthouses, the keepers' houses in the actual lighthouse buildings are still there in many of these places, and they've been repurposed.
Mm-hmm.
So they're institutes, they're bed and breakfast, they're museums.
Okay.
There are different organizations that applied and have received the leases for them from nonprofits, and the government has given them the lease on these buildings to be able to use for their communities, and it really has been a positive thing for preservation purposes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I think there's a romance and an Americana, an earlier time period feel that I think people do have a positive feel about the idea of a lighthouse keeper and his family living in some remote area.
Until you try it.
Until you try it.
Yeah, until you try it. Until you almost starve because the tender doesn't stop by to bring you your food,
Oh, no.
Until your kids get sick and there's no help nearby. There's a lot of things that were really difficult for these keepers.
Yeah. Okay.
Good point.
Let's take a little break, and then we'll come back, and we'll talk a little bit more about the book and the programming going on at the Maritime Museum and some of the great stories that you researched and learned about. So we got Adventures in History. We'll be right back.
And you are back to Adventures with History today with Mac and Julie and our guest, Dr. Deborah Baldwin. So thank you again for being here with us today.
Did you just say Adventures with History instead of Adventures in History?
No, I think it's at end at night.
I don't know. I'm going to have to play the
Can
tape.
we replay it? No. Let's not. Let's move on.
Let's move on.
Now, you were mentioning something during our break. Because we were talking about, we were fascinated with the markers and everything. And you were talking about a special ceremony that you had just been a part of.
Yeah. So what we do is we find out the keeper heritage and history, and we contact the descendants, the families, and we are able to get their photos and their stories and everything, which we publish articles in our magazine about. And then we try to involve local groups of the lighthouses in which these keepers served, and we try to get, if there's any local involvement or anything where where there's a group that is trying to preserve a lighthouse or an organization, and we get together with them, and we have our grave marker program, which is where we place the marker at the grave. We hold a ceremony for it, and we just did that this last 2 days ago, on the weekend. On Sunday, we all met in Greenwood Hills Cemetery in Portland to honor one of these Tillamook Rock Lighthouse keepers and his father. It was a great opportunity to be able to do this. Actually, this photo that I have, I brought a photo, which you can't, of course, see on the radio, but it's the photo that kind of started the whole research about the book, and it's of the lighthouse keeper, Orlo Hayward. And it had been floating around in the lighthouse world for probably 50 years without being identified because it had been out of the family archive, and when it was copied at the Coast Guard Museum of the Northwest, they, in their transfer of their systems, they had lost the information about who it was.
Oh,
so
no.
all these lighthouse books that have been researched and printed for over the years just called it a Tillamook Rock Lighthouse keeper, but never knew who it was. Mm-hmm. And it was just by another kind of fluke circumstance that I came across the information by staying in Heceta Head Lighthouse in Florence. Up on their wall, they had framed pictures of lighthouse keepers, and I contacted their family, and one of them said, "I got the shoebox of 350 photos that's sitting on my shelf in my closet that I inherited, and I don't know what to do with them all. And there's a bunch of stuff in there on Tillamook Rock." And he sent them to me, and we pulled them out, and lo and behold, here is this keeper's picture in there with his name on the bottom of it. It was identified.
Wow.
So we contacted the family. Sure enough, they had another 100 photos, so we had about 500 photos total of Tillamook Rock as a result of that, of this time period of these keepers. So anyway, we were able to hold the ceremony for him on Sunday and place a marker at his grave, which was great. We had about 50 people there, including Coast Guard that came from your Astoria Tongue Point Depot base. Mm-hmm. They were placing the markers on the grave.
The tender keepers, aren't they?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the buoy
tenders.
Yeah,
buoy tenders, and that was really special to have them involved. This particular keeper, Orlo Hayward, his father had served at Tongue Point Depot for 10 years as a depot mechanic back in the 1960s. So it was really cool that we were able to bring that heritage further and involve them as well.
So is that what started the research on the book?
It did.
Or, okay,
that's
what prompted
that's the whole
it.
thing that prompted it, was finding out who this keeper was and what he was doing, and then finding this archive of photos. So the next question logically was, how did we get 500 photos of these guys, and why did they do that? Mm-hmm. And in talking to the family members, it turned out they told us the story of how these 4 young men, We call them the Fearless Foursome. They were on the rock in 1920 together. They had their fathers were serving at Heceta Head together as keepers, and the 4 sons had gotten together and gone into service at Tillamook Rock. Their hobby became photography. So they bought brownie cameras. And remember those, those
square,
old pop out,
yeah.
those things that pop out and you can take, the camera of the age, right?
Yeah.
So they had those, and whoever had shore leave went and got rolls of film and shot a whole bunch of stuff, came back to the lighthouse. They set up a photo developing studio in the lighthouse at Tillamook Rock, and they spent their free time developing these photos and experimenting with photographic techniques, and then they took a whole bunch of photos of life on Tillamook Rock.
Wow.
And, when we saw these things, it was amazing because they had fun. I mean, these guys had incredible amount of fun. And the pictures that are in this book, if you just, scan through chapter 2, there's, a glut of pictures that just show them doing all sorts of crazy things, like hanging off cliffs and sitting on the top of the derrick and, hanky-panky and sitting inside the foghorn, just really fun scenes and fun things that they did. And it kind of negates that whole thing about Terrible Tilly, Terrible Tilly, the place nobody wants to go because you'll be washed away by the storms. And it shows a different side of life. It really does. And then we took that and it was like, okay, well, if they were having so much fun, how about other keepers? And, we just did some more research about other keepers and came across a bunch of stuff that let us know that really there's a whole backside to Tillamook Rock that people do not know about. The calmer side, the beautiful sunsets, the seabirds, the playing, the fishing, the enjoying life. I mean, storms happen, but not as frequently as people think. And the rest of the time, it seemed to be a pretty nice location.
That's a great line. It's kind of like just weather here, where people are like, "Oh, the rain's going to kill you if you move here."
I know.
Okay, yeah, it happens, but for the days it's not raining, it's
absolutely worth it.
So give the background in case people don't realize what time period are we talking about for Tillamook, and when did they create it? And
1880. The good old graveyard of the Pacific out here, where the Columbia River empties into the ocean, and the bar that's there has been known as the graveyard of the Pacific because of all the ships that get wrecked there, over 2,000, and over the period of time since the 1700s, and very treacherous past. And so, as the commerce grew in the 1800s, they decided that they really needed to have it marked for the approaches. So that's where we got Cape D Lighthouse on the one side. We had Point Adams on here in Astoria on this side that basically framed the harbor entrance. But as the traffic still increased, they decided they needed something more further south coming into the approach into the river. And so they decided that Tillamook Rock would be a likely location, a good place to put it. And so in 1881, the light was established there. You can imagine these guys going out there and seeing this rock and trying to figure out if they're going to build a building on top of this rock out in the middle, a mile out in the middle of the ocean.
Yeah.
And there's lots of interesting tales about the story. Actually, a person was killed. The first survey team that went out there, his name was John Turalis, and he got sucked under as he jumped onto the rock. He missed his footing. It got pulled under in the undertow, and he drowned. And they looked at that as a bad omen.
I was going to say, and then they proceeded anyway.
Right, they proceeded anyway, and it took them a year, but they blew off the top of the rock and they leveled it, and they built the lighthouse. And then its operational life was from 1881 through 1957, when they decided it was no longer needed. It was very expensive to maintain, as you can imagine, being where its location and the isolation of it. And so they put a lighted buoy, a whistle buoy out there in 1957 that has basically kept it going ever since. They have buoys that mark the passage now.
So I'm sure that it changed from time period to time period, but the foursome that you talked about that got into cameras, and you made the comment that every time somebody would go on shore leave on shore, they would buy film. What if I'm signing up for this? What is my time on the rock? I mean, what's my
average?
Yeah, what am I doing out there?
It depends on if you liked it or not. Okay, the first keeper lasted a whole 3 months. Now, the initial thing I can imagine without, the conveniences of any type of just modern living period would be a very difficult place to live. As the conveniences became more, like, in the 1950s, they had TV. They had TV out there. I mean, they had
years.
They had a refrigerator and a stove, and all the stuff that they could, incorporate because of just normal increase of our standard of living, right? But in the early time, they didn't. The other time it was really difficult. So they stayed maybe just a year or two. But there were many keepers who stayed 20 years.
Wow. And how often, I mean, what was their rotation of how often do I go back ashore?
That varied on the weather sometimes. They were supposed to be able to get 72 days on and, well, sometimes up to 3 months. That would be, a period of time, again, depending on the weather. But they were supposed to have like 3 weeks off, and that rarely happened. This guy, the same keeper that I've been talking about, Orlo Hayward, he was there for 12 and a half months without relief.
Oh, my gosh.
And there were some keepers who turned it down. There's a famous guy by the name of Robert Gerloff, who was the most famous keeper. He stayed 25 years. And he did not ever want to go on rotation because he loved the lighthouse so much. He wanted to stay there forever and even be buried there. He asked them to sew a body bag for him so he could be dropped off the end of the rock.
That's just not right.
But Lighthouse Service...
But did that happen?
No, they turned him down. They turned him down. He's buried here in Warrenton. He's in the Ocean View Cemetery here in Warrenton. Perfect name, Ocean View. You can't see the rock, but, he loved the rock. He had a kind of a love affair with it. He didn't have any family, and he called it his wife and children and family.
And how many people were usually on the rock at any time?
It took a full complement. There were 5 keepers, and one was usually supposed to be on leave. But again, like I say, the leave was kind of just depending on the weather and that the tender could get there. And because if you can't get off the rock, then your time that you're following in rotation is not going to happen because the first guy didn't get off.
Yeah.
So it just was kind of varied whenever that happened.
So I've read at least one newspaper account where they talk about a wave that hit the thing that was as tall as the light.
Yeah. That happens frequently. I mean, there's even photos now that people take of you can see waves breaking over the top.
Yeah.
It's 134 feet tall. Mm-hmm. The most horrendous storm, it was actually a cyclone in 1934. And the cyclone did a lot of damage. It was considered the storm of the century there. And they actually say that it's the worst storm that hit the whole Pacific coast within this 20th century. They actually classify it as that, but it did a major destruction out there.
Wow. Well, we're running out of time, and I would love to hear another half an hour,
I know,
2 hour worth of stories. We can hear more stories. You can either buy the book. What is the title of the book?
The title is just Tillamook Rock Lighthouse. It's put out by Arcadia Images of America series, and we have 200 photos in there. Wonderful photos of these keepers having fun on Tillamook Rock.
A very different story.
It's available at the Maritime Museum where you are speaking.
It is. So we have some great programming finishing up today, Lighthouse Days. We have Deborah who's going to be doing some Ed-style talks this afternoon, followed by book signings. So if you want to come by, pick up the book and have this unique opportunity to meet Deborah and have your book signed, it's a great time to do that. And come listen to more about your Lighthouse talks.
Yeah. Look forward to it.
So, and give the times. When can they come?
So it looks like I think your first presentation is at noon
on
today.
Tillamook Rock, right?
Okay, and then that'll be followed by book signing, and then we'll start up about keeper stories at 1:30. We do have the full schedule on our website, so if you want the full schedule, go to the crmm.org website, and you can kind of see because they do vary a little bit from life as a lighthouse keeper to Tillamook Rock.
Yes. And other lighthouses,
Yeah.
So really people should come to more than one.
Oh, yeah. Well,
because it'll be different each
There are
time.
different topics each time, and they're 15 minutes each, and they focus on, like I have one on women in lighthouse service and, stories of keepers of the Oregon coast in general and like what life was like as a lighthouse keeper, and then talking about your local lighthouses, Cape Disappointment and North Head. So
given the fact that we know what the correct answer is, you can feel free to give a different answer, but what's your favorite lighthouse in the world?
My favorite lighthouse, I am sorry to say, actually, okay, I can
That's why it's okay to
I can
not
say
do
I have an East Coast and a West Coast. My East Coast lighthouse is Little River Light, which is where I met our, like I say, this experience where I met the editor and got into lighthouse stuff in general. That's my favorite lighthouse on the East Coast to stay at. West Coast, it's Heceta Head.
Okay. All right. Fair enough.
Perfect.
All right. Well, this is going to be great. So I hope everybody stops by and hears you talk. And looking forward to looking through the book. How exciting! And glad you did this. How exciting to find these photographs.
It was wonderful. Yeah. It was absolutely. It's incredible that these things were sitting on just somebody's shelf.
Yeah.
And in a closet. He didn't even know who the guy was who he'd inherited it from. He didn't even realize how he was related to the family.
Amazing.
And being able to find these and put them in print for other people to enjoy. It's wonderful.
Well, thank you so much for coming in today, and we'll catch you next week.
And we'll see you this afternoon.
Go make some history.